In December 1832, following the pattern of biblical times, Joseph announced the building of a temple. He said it had been revealed to him that it was to be a house of prayer, a house of fasting, a house of faith, a house of God. Its construction would make it possible for the saints to be what Joseph called endowed with power from on high. The temple cost about $50,000, a great sacrifice for a people sharing their food to stay alive.
Come, brethren, let us go into the stone quarry and work for the Lord. Joseph Smith.
Without revelation, Joseph could not know what was wanted any more than any other man. And without commandment, the church were too few in number, too weak in faith, and too poor in purse to attempt such a mighty enterprise. Brigham Young.
Nothing was spared in the effort. When Joseph outlined what was needed in terms of skill and artistry, Heber C. Kimball said he knew someone who could do the job, but the man lived in Canada and was not a member of the church. Joseph dispatched Brigham Young to convert Artemus Millet and then bring him to Kirtland. He added that Millet should also bring $1,000 to assist with the project. Weeks later, Brigham, Artemus, and the money arrived in Kirtland.
There was but one mainspring to all our thoughts and actions, and that was the building of the Lord's house. Lucy Mack Smith.
When they were willing to sacrifice, first to be there in that community, and secondly to give up all sorts of material things to build, for that day and age in that small community, a magnificent edifice, it really was proof that their faith was more than skin deep, that they believed.
Women wanted to participate as much as men in the construction of that holy edifice. And so they did whatever they could do. They raised whatever money was available. They would sell things. Many of them, we read in their diaries, gave up priceless heirlooms and sold them in order to buy materials to build the temple.
For people who became Latter-day Saints, the world would never be the same. The world they had known before was gone.
The Kirtland Temple became, for most, the highlight of their spiritual and religious life. They felt amply rewarded ultimately at its dedication and thereafter for the sacrifice that went into it.
To add luster to the outside, stories describe the women offering their china to be crushed and mixed into the plaster and then applied to the temple walls.
Our wives were all the time knitting, spinning, and sewing, and in fact, I may say, doing all kinds of work. They were just as busy as any of us, and God will bless them forevermore. Heber C. Kimball.
Through the winter of 1836, saints labored to complete the temple despite hostility from the disaffected members and militant townspeople. One worker described holding the sword in one hand, the trowel in the other. That March, they completed the temple and held special services in the new edifice. Joseph told the saints that the Lord would appear and accept his house and the sacrifice of the people.
The ceremonies of that dedication may be rehearsed, but no mortal language can describe the heavenly manifestations of that memorable day. Eliza R. Snow.
The temple was filled with angels, which fact I declared to the congregation. The people of the neighborhood came running together, hearing an unusual sound within, and seeing a bright light like a pillar of fire resting upon the temple, and were astonished at what was taking place. Joseph Smith.
A little girl came to my door, and in wonder called me out, exclaiming, "The meeting is on the top of the meeting house." I went to the door, and there I saw on the temple angels clothed in white, covering the roof from end to end. This was in broad daylight, in the afternoon. Crescendia Huntington.
3 days later, Joseph and Oliver prayed with their fellow saints in the temple.
Joseph opened the meeting by prayer. Never until then had I heard a man address his Maker as though he was present listening. There was no ostentation, no raising of the voice as by enthusiasm, but a plain conversational tone. It appeared to me as though I could see the Lord standing facing his humblest of all servants I had ever seen. Whether this was really the case, I cannot say. But one thing I can say, it was the crowning of all the prayers I ever heard. Daniel Tyler.
In contrast to the outpouring of spiritual jubilation, came challenges to Joseph and his work from disenchanted factions. Among the defectors were apostles, witnesses to the Book of Mormon, and members who had at one time praised his name.
The knees of many of the strongest men in the church faltered. Brigham Young.
These individuals saw themselves somewhat as peers of the prophet. And it was easy for them, if things didn't go their way, to begin to say, well, maybe Joseph's missing it a little bit. He's not as in tune as he ought to be, and we're right. Joseph learned as he went.
I guess prophets have to see ahead, but when you're in the midst of a project, when everything seems to be falling apart, when there's so much day-to-day business of holding things together, to have a vision that carries you beyond that, that's a very difficult trait of a personality, and I think Joseph Smith had that.
Defections did not deter Joseph. He wrote that in this state of things, God revealed to me that something new must be done for the salvation of his children. On July 4th, Joseph asked trusted friend and apostle Heber C. Kimball to go to England on a mission to preach the gospel.
The idea of being appointed to such an important mission was almost more than I could bear up under. I felt my weakness and was nearly ready to sink under it. But the moment I understood the will of my Heavenly Father, I felt a determination to go at all hazards. Heber C. Kimball.
At 10 a.m. on July 30th, 1837, they baptized 9 members. When I heard of it, it gave me great joy, for then I knew that the work of God had taken root in that land. Joseph Smith.
Within 8 months, 2,000 British citizens had joined the new church. To finance some of the needs of the burgeoning church and community, Joseph and his advisors had established a bank named the Kirtland Safety Society. When the state of Ohio denied the charter in February 1837, the bank's notes became worthless. Losses to its subscribers were legion. Many in Kirtland blamed Joseph for their losses and joined a growing chorus calling him a fallen prophet.
The enemy abroad and apostates in our midst united in their schemes, and many became disaffected toward me as though I were the sole cause of those very evils I was most strenuously striving against. Joseph Smith.
Disillusioned Mormons denounced the prophet. Friends repudiated his leadership. Other enemies circulated attacks in papers and pamphlets.
Church leaders seem to think that everything must bow at their nod, thus violating the laws of the land. William McClellan.
One of the problems is they did believe in many cases. They believed in the Book of Mormon. They believed in priesthood authority restored. They believed Joseph had been a prophet. But they believed that in some fashion he had fallen. And so they couldn't leave it alone. They wanted to right the church. They wanted to rebuild it in their image of what it ought to have become instead of what it was.
Someone has observed that people can leave the church, but they can't leave it alone. And the worst persecutors of Joseph Smith were invariably those who had first been his associates and then had left his side and turned on him.